In 1990, Martin Scorsese's film Goodfellas didn't just tell a story about the mob, it practically brought the real mob onto the set. Some real-life gangsters ended up in scenes, and actors used details straight from FBI files to make their performances more realistic. The result felt so authentic that even Scorsese admitted at times it was almost too real. What many fans never knew was that making Goodfellas was just as dangerous and unpredictable as living the life it portrayed. For the cast and crew, it wasn't just a movie, it sometimes felt like stepping into a real crime scene. Before Goodfellas became the legendary film that redefined gangster cinema, it started with a book called Wise Guy, written by Nicholas Pileggi in 1985. The book told the true story of Henry Hill, a mobster who turned informant after years of working within organized crime. The journey from page to screen was far from smooth. The movie came close to being canceled several times, and it almost never got made. When Scorsese first heard about Wise Guy, he wasn't interested. After making Mean Streets and Raging Bull, he felt burned out on crime stories and wanted to move in a different direction. His agent sent him the book, but he didn't even bother to open it. For months, it sat untouched on his shelf. Then, after one of his projects with a studio fell apart, Scorsese was feeling frustrated and defeated. Late one night, he finally picked up Wise Guy and started reading. Within a few pages, he was hooked. Excited, he called Nicholas Pileggi in the middle of the night, at 2 a.m, and said, "I've been waiting for this book my whole life." Pileggi, who had always admired Scorsese's work, responded, "I've been waiting for your call my whole life." It was the perfect partnership. But even with Scorsese's name attached, studios weren't convinced. Executives said the film was too violent, too dark, and didn't have a hero or a clear moral message. They complained there was no redemption, no character audiences could root for. Producer Irwin Winkler had to fight to explain that this was exactly what made it powerful. It was about showing life inside the mob exactly as it was, without glamorizing it. Eventually, Warner Brothers agreed to make the film, but legal problems continued to threaten production. Because the story was based on real mobsters, many of whom were still alive or in witness protection, there were serious safety and legal concerns. Lawyers worried about lawsuits and retaliation. To protect everyone, names were changed, timelines were adjusted, and several real people were combined into single characters. Even with all those precautions, Henry Hill himself couldn't stay away. He was supposed to be banned from the set for safety reasons, but he kept sneaking on to watch the filming. The script for Goodfellas was created in a unique, fast-paced way. Pileggi would share stories he had uncovered through his research and interviews, while Scorsese paced around the room, pointing and shouting, "That's a scene." They built the movie piece by piece from real-life events, shaping it into something that felt like a documentary but moved with the energy of a thriller. Every moment was designed to make viewers feel like they were inside the mob world, not just watching it. When it came to casting, things got even more complicated. It's hard to imagine anyone other than Ray Liotta as Henry Hill, but at first, the studio had other ideas. Producers threw around names like Tom Cruise, Sean Penn, and even Alec Baldwin. All of them were well-known actors at the time and seemed like safer choices for a leading role. Baldwin even auditioned, but something didn't fit. Liotta, who was still building his career after his roles in Field of Dreams and Something Wild, wasn't an obvious pick, but he knew he could do it. Liotta sent Scorsese an audition tape, but Scorsese didn't watch it right away. Months later, fate stepped in. Both of them ended up at the Venice Film Festival. Scorsese was there to promote The Last Temptation of Christ, a movie that had stirred a lot of controversy, and he was surrounded by bodyguards for protection. When Liotta spotted him, he tried to walk up and introduce himself, but the guards pushed him back roughly, thinking he was a fan causing trouble. Instead of losing his temper, Liotta stayed calm and composed. Scorsese noticed how he handled the situation, with quiet confidence and a little edge, and in that moment, he realized Liotta was perfect for Henry Hill. That calm under pressure became one of the key traits of Henry's character in the film. Liotta's ability to balance charm, fear, and danger helped make the story feel believable. He wasn't a hero, but he wasn't pure evil either. He was human, a man caught between loyalty, greed, and survival. The realism of Goodfellas extended beyond the performances. Scorsese wanted every detail to reflect the truth of mob life, from the clothes and cars to the way people talked and moved. He encouraged improvisation during filming, which led to some of the most famous moments in movie history. The funny how "Am I funny to you?" scene, for example, wasn't in the script. Joe Pesci came up with it based on a real incident from his own life, when he accidentally offended a real gangster. Scorsese loved it so much that he kept it in the movie, and it became one of the most quoted lines in film history. Filming wasn't easy, though. Many scenes were emotionally intense, and the actors often found it hard to shake off the tension after the cameras stopped. The line between acting and reality blurred. Even Scorsese admitted there were times when the set felt too real, when he wondered if they'd gone too far in trying to capture authenticity. Crew members would sometimes whisper that certain extras looked a little too convincing, and it later turned out that some of them really did have mob connections. Despite the chaos, everything came together. When Goodfellas was released, it stunned audiences. The energy, realism, and storytelling were unlike anything people had seen before. Critics praised it for breaking the rules of traditional Hollywood crime films. There were no neat endings, no moral lessons, just raw truth about a lifestyle built on loyalty, fear, and betrayal. Behind the scenes, though, Scorsese and the cast knew how close they had come to losing it all. The production nearly fell apart many times, between studio hesitation, legal battles, and safety concerns. But their persistence paid off. Goodfellas went on to become one of the most influential films ever made, inspiring countless directors and defining the modern gangster genre. Looking back, it's easy to see why the film still feels alive decades later. It wasn't just made with skill, it was made with risk, obsession, and passion. Every frame carries that energy. Scorsese and Pileggi didn't just adapt a book, they created a living, breathing world that pulled audiences into the heart of the mob and never let go. For everyone involved, Goodfellas wasn't simply a movie about crime. It was a story about real people, real danger, and the thin line between art and reality. The character of Henry Hill had to stay calm and collected in the most stressful situations, and Ray Liotta had already shown he could do that. After seeing how composed Liotta was when bodyguards shoved him at the Venice Film Festival, Scorsese finally watched his audition tape and realized he had found his lead. But another obstacle remained. Producer Irwin Winkler wasn't convinced. Winkler thought they could cast someone more famous and wasn't sure Liotta could carry such a demanding role. That changed one night in Los Angeles when Liotta spotted Winkler at a restaurant. Instead of avoiding him, Liotta walked right over, introduced himself, and confidently explained why he was perfect for the part. Whatever he said worked. The next morning, Winkler called Scorsese and said he was on board. Liotta officially got the role that would define his career. Once filming began, Liotta admitted he was nervous about working alongside Robert De Niro. De Niro was a legend, and Liotta felt like he had to prove himself every day. But after their first day of shooting, De Niro reassured him by saying, "Don't worry, this is going to work out great." That simple encouragement gave Liotta the confidence he needed to dive deeper into the character. To prepare, he listened to hours of FBI recordings of the real Henry Hill. He noticed little details, like how Hill was always chewing on something, and decided to add that habit into his performance to make it more realistic. Behind the scenes, though, Liotta was going through real emotional pain. His mother passed away during filming, and he channeled his grief into his work. That raw emotion came through most clearly in the intense scene where Henry beats up a man for harassing his wife, Karen. Liotta said that moment wasn't just acting, it was him releasing everything he was feeling inside. Some of the most iconic moments in Goodfellas weren't even in the script. One of the most famous is the funny how scene. In the film, Henry laughs and says, "You're funny," and Tommy, played by Joe Pesci, suddenly turns serious and asks, "Funny how? Am I funny to you?" Those two simple words, "funny how," were never written down in the script, but they ended up changing film history. Liotta still remembers that day vividly, saying, "That wasn't what we rehearsed, not even close." The scene came directly from Pesci's real-life experience. Years earlier, when Pesci worked at a restaurant, he had once called a real mobster funny, and the man had reacted with sudden, chilling anger. Pesci remembered thinking he might die right there. When he told Scorsese that story, the director immediately saw its potential and said, "That's a scene." But instead of writing a script for it, Scorsese told Pesci and Liotta to improvise. None of the other actors in the room were told what was going to happen. So when Pesci suddenly switched from joking to terrifying in a matter of seconds, their nervous laughter and frightened expressions were completely real. Scorsese loved the unpredictable energy it created. From then on, improvisation became a key part of how he directed the movie. He often whispered different instructions to each actor before filming a scene. Lorraine Bracco, who played Karen Hill, once said Scorsese would give her one set of directions while telling Liotta something totally opposite. The confusion this caused created genuine tension between them, which showed up perfectly on screen. Even the violent scenes were often improvised. Joe Pesci once asked to perform one of the movie's most brutal moments, the shocking killing of a rival gangster, in a single take. Scorsese agreed. The reaction you see from the other actors wasn't acting, they were truly shocked because they didn't expect Pesci to go that far. The chaos on set made things difficult for the crew, though. Script supervisor Dina Allen later said trying to keep track of dialogue, movement, and continuity during those improvised scenes was nearly impossible. It was like trying to document a hurricane, she recalled. The editing process was just as wild and creative. The film's legendary montage showing mob bodies turning up in cars, garbage trucks, and meat freezers wasn't part of the original plan. Scorsese and editor Thelma Schoonmaker came up with the idea later, in the editing room. They realized that by showing all those grisly discoveries back-to-back, they could deliver a more powerful emotional punch than by spacing them out. That decision helped make the film's ending sequences some of the most memorable in cinema history. One of the hardest parts to film was Henry Hill's final, drug-fueled day before his arrest. Scorsese wanted viewers to feel Henry's paranoia, the constant fear, the jittery energy, and the sense that everything was collapsing. Instead of sticking to a strict script, Scorsese gave Liotta only a rough outline and told him to let his instincts take over. To look truly exhausted and anxious, Liotta stayed awake for several days before filming, without using any drugs, just sleeplessness and caffeine. The result was a performance that felt raw, frantic, and real, as if the audience was right there in Henry's spiraling mind. Improvisation didn't stop with the actors. The real Henry Hill, who was living under witness protection, couldn't resist getting involved. He would secretly call the set to give Liotta advice on how he used to walk, talk, or react in certain situations. Liotta quietly took his suggestions and used some of Henry's exact words in his scenes. It was risky, but it added an extra layer of authenticity that audiences could feel even if they didn't realize why. The movie's ending also changed at the last minute. Originally, Scorsese had planned for a more traditional conclusion. Henry would be shown quietly entering his new life under witness protection, cut off from the world he once knew. But during editing, Scorsese decided it wasn't enough. He rewrote the ending overnight, adding a bold twist. Henry would look directly into the camera and talk to the audience, breaking the fourth wall. That final moment, where he says he has to live the rest of his life like a schnook, perfectly captured the emptiness of his new reality. The scene was filmed in just one take, and it worked flawlessly. Every choice, every bit of improvisation, and every ounce of risk made Goodfellas what it is today, not just a gangster film, but a living, breathing world that feels real from the first shot to the last. Scorsese, Liotta, Pesci, De Niro, and the rest of the cast didn't just perform, they inhabited their characters. The blurred lines between reality and fiction gave the movie its lasting power. Behind the laughter, the violence, and the chaos was an undeniable truth. The world of Goodfellas wasn't just being acted, it was being lived. One of the biggest reasons Goodfellas feels so real is that Martin Scorsese and his team blurred the line between movie and reality in ways most filmmakers would never dare. They didn't just tell a story about the mob, they let bits of the real world slip into nearly every scene. For example, when Henry Hill first meets Jimmy Conway, played by Robert De Niro, Jimmy casually hands out $20 bills to everyone around him. Normally, a scene like that would use fake money. But De Niro didn't like how prop bills looked or felt. He wanted the real thing, the texture, the weight, the sound. So the prop master took out $5,000 of his own cash for De Niro to use during filming. After every take, no one was allowed to leave the set until every single bill was carefully collected and counted. That tiny detail added a layer of real tension, not just for the actors but for the entire crew. You can actually feel that nervous, lived-in energy on screen. The mix of fact and fiction showed up again near the end of the movie, when Henry and Karen Hill meet with a U.S. attorney to discuss entering witness protection. That attorney wasn't an actor, he was the Real Edward A. McDonald, the same prosecutor who handled Henry Hill's actual case in real life. Scorsese had originally gone to McDonald's office to study the space and get inspiration for how to recreate it on set. But during their meeting, McDonald surprised everyone by suggesting he should just play himself. Scorsese agreed to a quick test, and he was perfect. Even better, one of his lines, "Don't give me the babe in the woods routine, Karen," wasn't in the script at all. It was something he'd really said to Karen Hill years earlier. That line made it into the final cut, giving the scene a sense of authenticity no script could have created. Ray Liotta also went to great lengths to make sure his performance as Henry Hill felt real. He spent hours listening to FBI surveillance tapes of the Real Henry, studying the rhythm of his voice, his pauses, and even his breathing patterns. Liotta wanted to understand not just how Henry talked, but how he thought. Those subtle touches made his performance feel almost documentary-like. Scorsese added his own personal touch too. His mother, Catherine Scorsese, appears in the movie as Tommy's mother in the kitchen scene, the one where she proudly shows the gang her painting. His father also appears briefly in another scene. These family cameos added warmth and a sense of familiarity that made the story feel more grounded and human, even in the middle of all the violence. But the strangest and most fascinating blending of reality came when real mobsters started showing up on set. Not only were the props and people authentic, the underworld itself was closer than anyone expected. Some of them arrived by invitation, while others simply showed up on their own. The film was about real people, and word spread quickly through certain circles that Scorsese was making a movie about their world. Soon enough, the actual mob started taking an interest. Assistant director Joseph Reedy later described the uneasy feeling of those days. "They'd just appear out of nowhere," he said. "No introductions, no names. They'd stand quietly, watch a scene, and maybe offer a suggestion or two. Sometimes, one of them would point out that a detail wasn't quite right. A real wise guy wouldn't flick his cigarette that way, one might say, or that's not how they'd count money." It was hard to tell if they were being helpful or sending a message, but their presence definitely kept everyone on edge. The production officially had law enforcement consultants helping to ensure accuracy, but unofficially, the best advice often came from those unnamed visitors who seemed to know exactly what Scorsese was filming each day. No one knew who they were, but they always appeared at the right time. Ray Liotta had one encounter he never forgot. He was practicing Henry Hill's nervous hand movements when an older man he didn't recognize approached him. The stranger quietly said, Henry's nervous tic was in his left hand, not the right. Liotta asked how he knew that. The man smiled and said, "Me and him did business once," then walked away. Liotta never saw him again. Even the film's famous Copacabana tracking shot, one of the most iconic single takes in cinema, got help from someone unexpected. While filming, a kitchen worker pulled Liotta aside and showed him exactly how Henry used to move through the club, step by step. The man explained that he had been there decades earlier and had seen Henry do it many times. Liotta followed his directions precisely, which helped make the long, continuous shot feel effortless and authentic. Lorraine Bracco, who played Henry's wife Karen, had a similar experience. While walking through Little Italy, she was approached by a woman who claimed to have known the real Karen Hill. The woman politely corrected how Bracco was portraying her and even gave her advice on what kind of jewelry Karen would have worn or how she might have styled her hair. Those small details helped Bracco refine her performance and make Karen feel like a real person instead of just a character. Costume designer Richard Bruno also remembered the quiet scrutiny from unexpected visitors. He said that people connected to the real mob would sometimes watch over his shoulder as he worked, commenting on the clothes, the suits, or the jewelry. They'd make sure every outfit looked exactly like what people in their world actually wore. Bruno later admitted that while it was nerve-wracking, it also gave him insights no costume archive ever could. He could see the real fabrics, the real patterns, and the subtle codes of fashion that marked who had power and who didn't. All of this, the real money, the real attorney, the real mobsters lurking around, created an atmosphere that blurred fiction and reality so deeply that even the cast sometimes forgot where one ended and the other began. Everyone on set felt the weight of authenticity. Scorsese encouraged it, because he wanted Goodfellas to feel like the audience was watching real life unfold, not a movie about it. That authenticity is one reason why the film still feels alive decades later. Every movement, every glance, every sound has the rawness of truth. Scorsese's attention to detail, combined with the unpredictable presence of real mobsters and real people from Henry Hill's world, gave Goodfellas a unique energy that no other gangster movie has ever matched. It wasn't just a film about crime, it was a snapshot of a real time and place, made by people who lived close enough to it to know exactly how it should look, sound, and feel. In the end, Goodfellas became more than just a movie. It became a bridge between fact and fiction, a living document of America's criminal underworld disguised as entertainment. Every bit of tension, humor, and danger on screen came from that collision of worlds. It's why when you watch Goodfellas, it never feels fake. It feels like you're there, standing beside them, watching real people live out their dangerous, glamorous, and tragic lives right in front of you. Reality often bled into the making of Goodfellas, giving the movie a level of realism few films ever achieve. Director Martin Scorsese and his team blurred the line between fiction and fact so seamlessly that the story felt more lived than acted. One of the clearest examples is when Henry Hill first meets Robert De Niro's character, Jimmy Conway. In that scene, Jimmy casually hands out $20 bills as tips. Normally, movies would use fake money, but De Niro didn't like how prop bills looked or felt. He wanted the real weight of cash in his hands. The prop master ended up using $5,000 of his own money for the scene. After each take, no one could leave until every single bill was counted and collected. That simple choice added real tension to the set. Everyone was aware they were dealing with actual money, and the atmosphere became more charged and authentic. Scorsese carried that sense of realism throughout the entire production. Later in the film, there's a scene where Henry and Karen Hill talk with a U.S. attorney about joining the Witness Protection Program. That man wasn't an actor, he was Edward A. McDonald, the real attorney who had handled Henry Hill's case in real life. Scorsese originally met him just to study his office for accuracy, but McDonald offered to play himself. After a quick test, he was cast, and his performance brought a genuine energy that couldn't be faked. One of his lines, "Don't give me the babe in the woods routine, Karen," wasn't even in the script. It came straight from his memory of what he'd said to Karen Hill years earlier. That kind of natural realism made the movie feel more like a documentary than fiction. Ray Liotta, who played Henry Hill, also took authenticity seriously. He spent hours listening to FBI recordings of the real Henry Hill to capture his voice, his pauses, and even his breathing. Scorsese added another personal touch by bringing his own parents into the movie. His mother appeared in a kitchen scene, and his father showed up later as part of the cast. Those personal details gave Goodfellas a warmth that balanced its violence and tension. But the movie's connection to real life went even deeper the day real mobsters started showing up on set. Sometimes they came by invitation, other times they just appeared without warning. Assistant director Joseph Reedy recalled how unsettling it could be. These men would stand quietly, watching, then make small comments like, "That's not how we'd count money," or "A wise guy wouldn't flick his cigarette like that." They were never on the payroll, but their advice was too precise to ignore. Word had spread about the film, and people connected to the real crew it was based on suddenly took an interest in how they were being portrayed. Officially, Goodfellas had law enforcement consultants. Unofficially, the most accurate input came from these anonymous visitors who somehow always knew when and where the crew was filming. Ray Liotta once recalled a man approaching him while he was practicing Henry's mannerisms. The stranger said, "You're using the wrong hand." Henry's nervous tic was on the left. When Liotta asked how he knew, the man just said, "Me and him did business," then disappeared. Even iconic scenes benefited from unexpected help. The famous Copacabana tracking shot, for example, was refined after a kitchen worker, who had actually been there years earlier, showed Liotta exactly how Henry would have moved through the club. Lorraine Bracco, who played Karen Hill, had her own brush with reality. While walking through Little Italy, a woman stopped her and corrected her portrayal of Karen, giving her jewelry and style tips that only someone who truly knew the real Karen could have known. Costume designer Richard Bruno remembered that sometimes, the visitors didn't even need to say a word. One man simply pointed at a suit and said, "Jimmy wouldn't wear that color." The costume was changed immediately. Even De Niro's famous "never rat on your friends" scene had to be reworked. Someone close to the real-life figure told Scorsese that Jimmy Conway would have been subtler in how he gave advice. Joe Pesci, who played Tommy DeVito, also got calls from people he'd grown up around. They weren't threats, but strong reminders to get it right. Producer Barbara DeFina later clarified that none of these people were officially involved, they just happened to visit. Still, the experience created a surreal mix: FBI advisors on one day, mob-connected visitors the next. That tension showed up clearly in the prison cooking scene, one of the film's most famous sequences. The way they sliced garlic razor thin, the ingredients they used, all came from people who had actually lived that life. Some of their suggestions even sounded like confessions. Scorsese admitted that strangers would sometimes correct small details about crimes in a way only someone on the inside could. The strangest moment came at the film's premiere. In the audience were several men whose names had been changed for legal reasons, watching actors portray them on screen. Afterward, a note was delivered to the production team that read, "You got it right." No one was sure if it was a compliment or a warning. Joe Pesci's path to Goodfellas was just as unique. His performance as Tommy DeVito became legendary, but he nearly turned the role down. When Scorsese first approached him about playing Tommy, Pesci hesitated. He didn't think he was the right fit and almost refused. Ironically, he already knew someone named Tommy DeVito, the guitarist from the band The Four Seasons, so the name felt odd to him. Scorsese invited him over to talk, and during that meeting, Pesci told a story about a time he was joking around with friends and someone said, "Funny how?" Pesci thought the line could be powerful in a movie scene. Scorsese agreed, and together they built one of the most iconic moments in film history. Pesci agreed to take the role, as long as some of his real-life stories could be woven into the script. Later, Scorsese worried Pesci might be too old for the part, since he was considering making the characters younger. Determined not to lose the opportunity, Pesci tried on makeup and prosthetics to appear younger, and it worked. But even after landing the role, he ran into another issue: the script. When Pesci read the part where Tommy kills Spider, the bartender, he didn't think it made sense. The motivation felt off. To resolve it, writer Nicholas Pileggi went straight to the real Henry Hill, who confirmed that the event had happened exactly that way. Hill even signed a note for Pesci that read, "Dear Joe, this is exactly what happened." Henry Hill. Pesci's dedication paid off. His portrayal of Tommy DeVito was frighteningly authentic. Henry Hill himself later said the performance was 95% true to life. When Pesci won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, he kept his speech short and unforgettable, only 5 words: "It is my privilege. Thank you." Every part of Goodfellas reflected this obsessive commitment to truth. From real cash to real lawyers, from mobsters visiting the set to Scorsese's own family appearing on screen, the film existed in the thin space between movie and memory. That's why, decades later, Goodfellas still doesn't just look real, it feels real. The real magic of Goodfellas didn't come only from its story, it came from the daring way that story was told. Behind the camera, Martin Scorsese and his team took bold technical risks that had never been tried before, and those risks ended up changing how movies were made forever. Every scene, every sound, and every cut was crafted with a purpose, blending art and innovation in ways that redefined cinematic storytelling. One of the most famous examples is the Copacabana tracking shot. In this scene, Henry Hill leads Karen through the back of the club, walking through busy hallways, past the kitchen, and finally arriving at a table that seems to appear just for them. The entire sequence lasts about 3 minutes and has no cuts. On screen, it feels smooth and effortless, but filming it was far from easy. Cinematographer Michael Ballhaus later admitted he was drenched in sweat after several failed attempts. Every movement had to be precise, each door had to open at exactly the right second, extras had to hit their marks perfectly, and camera operators had to move in perfect sync. If even one thing went wrong, the whole shot had to be restarted. Despite the chaos, Scorsese refused to give up on it. He wanted the shot done in one continuous take, not to show off, but to make the audience feel what Henry was feeling. The long, unbroken movement symbolized Henry's growing power and confidence, how his world seemed to bend to his will. The smoothness of the camera mirrored his rise through the mob world. When viewers watch that scene, they're not just seeing Henry enter a club, they're walking into his illusion of control. Another technical risk came during the helicopter sequence near the film's climax. Henry, high on cocaine and consumed by paranoia, becomes convinced that a helicopter is following him. To capture his spiraling mental state, Scorsese used frantic close-ups, mirrors, frying pans, pill bottles, and spinning helicopter blades, all shot in rapid succession. Editor Thelma Schoonmaker, one of Scorsese's closest collaborators, pieced the footage together in a way that made the editing itself reflect Henry's mental breakdown. The cuts grew quicker and more erratic as his paranoia worsened. Schoonmaker even experimented with the sound, layering voices and noises that entered before their visuals, making the audience feel like Henry's racing thoughts were running ahead of reality. Sound design became its own storytelling tool. Random noises and snatches of dialogue would fade in and out, building tension and confusion. Viewers weren't just watching Henry's panic, they were inside it. The technical precision of these chaotic moments turned the sequence into one of the most intense depictions of paranoia ever filmed. Music was another area where Goodfellas broke new ground. Scorsese used popular music not as background filler, but as an active part of the film's emotional rhythm, almost like another character. The official soundtrack lists 12 songs, but the film actually uses 43 different tracks, including instrumental pieces. No movie before had leaned so heavily on existing pop songs to drive its story. Clearing all those music rights nearly blew up the budget, but the result gave Goodfellas its unique pulse. Each song wasn't chosen randomly, it carried meaning and energy that matched the mood of the scene. Take the brutal pistol whipping scene set to Donovan's Atlantis. Scorsese timed the violence so that every hit landed perfectly with the beat of the song. The contrast between the dreamy music and the sudden brutality made the moment even more disturbing. Every note of music throughout the movie serves a purpose, it sets tone, deepens emotion, or underscores irony. The soundtrack became so iconic that it changed how later filmmakers thought about using popular music in storytelling. Even the film's approach to makeup and costume design pushed boundaries. Instead of using heavy prosthetics or exaggerated effects, the team studied how real mobsters looked, how years of stress, drugs, and violence physically aged them. Their goal was to make the characters look naturally worn down, not artificially made up. The transformation of the characters over the decades, from the clean-cut 1950s to the flashy, chaotic 1970s, was reflected in their clothing, their hairstyles, and even the lighting and set design. The production design evolved with the story. In the early years, the visuals are soft and nostalgic, full of warm colors and polished textures that make the mob life seem appealing. As time goes on, the palette becomes more garish, loud suits, harsh lighting, and cluttered spaces mirror the moral and emotional decay of the characters. By the end, the world looks as broken as Henry Hill's life feels. What truly elevated Goodfellas, though, was the way its actors performed. Scorsese didn't want traditional, sympathetic portrayals of criminals. He wanted honesty. He told his cast not to soften their characters or try to make them likable. They were to show these people exactly as they were, charming, brutal, selfish, and magnetic all at once. That raw approach changed the rules of screen acting. Ray Liotta, playing Henry Hill, embodied this perfectly. He never tried to justify Henry's actions or paint him as a victim. He just played him as a man caught up in his own ambition and greed. That neutrality made his performance incredibly powerful. Audiences could see themselves being drawn into Henry's lifestyle at first, then slowly repulsed as it fell apart. Scorsese's direction made viewers question their own fascination with power and corruption. Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro, and Lorraine Bracco followed the same philosophy. Pesci's unpredictable energy as Tommy DeVito gave the movie its dangerous edge. De Niro brought quiet menace to Jimmy Conway, showing how charm and violence can exist in the same person. Bracco's portrayal of Karen Hill revealed the emotional cost of living inside that world. Together, their performances created a realism that felt almost too close for comfort. Behind the camera, the crew took equally big risks. Scorsese and cinematographer Ballhaus used techniques that later became industry standards: handheld cameras for intimacy, freeze frames for emphasis, and voice-over narration that broke every storytelling rule but made the audience feel part of Henry's confession. Thelma Schoonmaker's editing style, with its rhythmic pacing and emotional timing, became a template for modern crime films. All these creative risks, from long takes and rapid editing to real-world accuracy and fearless acting, worked together to create something revolutionary. Goodfellas wasn't just a gangster movie, it was a masterclass in cinematic experimentation. It showed that technical innovation doesn't have to be flashy to be meaningful, it can serve story and emotion at the same time. In the end, every shot, sound, and line of Goodfellas feels alive because it came from a place of boldness and truth. Scorsese and his team didn't just make a film, they changed how films could be made. The techniques that once seemed risky became part of the language of modern cinema, proving that sometimes, the biggest rewards come from the greatest risks. Ray Liotta's approach to playing Henry Hill was simple but brilliant. He didn't try to make Henry good or bad, and he didn't ask for the audience's sympathy. Instead, he told Henry's story the way Henry himself would tell it, with pride, excitement, and no guilt. That choice made the film more unsettling but also more real. Henry's joy came from the money, the thrill, and the power, not from any sense of right or wrong. Most crime movies at the time showed criminals wrestling with their conscience, but Henry didn't. Liotta played him as someone completely at peace with his world, which made his downfall even more powerful. Robert De Niro brought a completely different kind of energy to Jimmy Conway. His danger came not from loud threats or big gestures, but from silence and control. Scorsese once said that De Niro's power was in his eyes, the quick flickers of thought behind every look. Jimmy Conway hardly raised his voice in the entire film, yet every scene he was in felt tense. De Niro studied how real mobsters behaved and even copied the way they stacked cash, all bills facing the same direction, perfectly neat. It wasn't something he was told to do, it came naturally once he slipped into the character. It felt like Jimmy Conway was living inside him. Lorraine Bracco, who played Karen Hill, also refused to take the easy route. She didn't want Karen to be seen only as a victim or a clueless wife. Instead, she played her as a woman drawn to the excitement and chaos of Henry's world. Karen loved the sense of belonging, the rush, and even the danger. One of the most striking scenes is when she hides a gun for Henry. Most actresses would have played that moment with fear or disgust, but Bracco played it with adrenaline and excitement. She said she wanted to show the part of Karen that enjoyed being part of that life, a truth most films about crime ignored. That honesty made her performance unforgettable. Paul Sorvino's portrayal of Paulie was another quiet masterpiece. Instead of yelling or making grand speeches, he led with silence and stillness. Sorvino changed his entire body language for the role, making his eyes look flat and emotionless. His calmness made him even more intimidating. When Paulie looked at someone, you could feel that they understood his power without him saying a word. That quiet control redefined how mob bosses were shown on screen, not as flashy or loud, but as calm forces holding the world together through fear. Together, these performances made Goodfellas feel alive, as if it wasn't a movie at all but a real glimpse into mob life. Every scene felt like a piece of a documentary, only sharper and more cinematic. When Goodfellas was finally released, it didn't just succeed, it changed filmmaking forever. It wasn't just another crime story, it was a new way of telling one. Almost overnight, directors, editors, and writers began calling producer Barbara DeFina, not to offer jobs, but to ask how they did it. The rhythm, the camera work, the music, it all felt like something new had been born. The film wasn't a massive box office smash, but it made about $46 million on a $25 million budget, which was still a big success for a dark, violent story with no clear heroes. Ironically, the same studio executives who had once tried to stop Scorsese's bold ideas later took credit for them. Scorsese himself laughed about it later, saying, "The very risks they feared became the industry's new standard." And he was right. After Goodfellas, the language of movies changed. Voice-over narration, which had once been criticized as lazy storytelling, became a respected tool. Scorsese showed that voice-over could reveal character, irony, and emotion all at once. It could make an audience feel close to someone even while judging them. That approach inspired future works like The Wolf of Wall Street and House of Cards, where the main characters talk directly to the audience with charm and manipulation. The film's fractured timeline, jumping back and forth between years, also changed how filmmakers thought about structure. Before Goodfellas, nonlinear storytelling was rare in mainstream movies. After it, films like Pulp Fiction proved that audiences could follow, and even enjoy, time-bending stories if they were told with confidence. The impact on the cast was huge, too. Ray Liotta became famous overnight, but it also trapped him. Directors couldn't see him as anything except a gangster. He once said that after Goodfellas, he was offered dozens of roles that were just variations of Henry Hill. Lorraine Bracco also found herself typecast. She was flooded with offers to play mob wives, but few had the depth or complexity of Karen Hill. Robert De Niro, already a legend, became even more respected for his total transformation. His attention to detail, right down to how Jimmy folded money, became a symbol of his dedication. Beyond the actors, Goodfellas completely reshaped the way crime stories were told. Scorsese managed to balance both the glamour and the horror of mob life. He showed the thrill and the destruction side by side. The audience could feel the attraction, the cars, the suits, the money, but also the emptiness and paranoia beneath it all. That mix became the blueprint for The Sopranos, which carried the same themes onto television and changed that medium forever. Visually, Goodfellas also rewrote the rules. The tracking shots, the whip pans, and the sudden freeze frames became part of film school curriculums everywhere. They weren't just stylistic flourishes, they were storytelling devices. Every camera move had meaning. Every freeze frame captured a turning point or a moment of reflection. The editing, led by Thelma Schoonmaker, brought rhythm and energy that made even dialogue scenes feel electric. The soundtrack changed how music was used in film. Before Goodfellas, popular songs were often background decoration. Scorsese turned them into narrative tools. He used music to mirror emotions, hint at danger, or even make violent moments ironic. The lyrics often commented on what was happening on screen, creating an extra layer of meaning. Quentin Tarantino later built his own signature style around this same idea, but Scorsese did it first and set the bar. Perhaps the clearest sign of Goodfellas' lasting power is how deeply it influenced younger filmmakers. Nearly every major American director under 60, from Paul Thomas Anderson to David O. Russell and Todd Phillips, has cited Goodfellas as one of their biggest inspirations. They learned from its pacing, its realism, and its refusal to moralize. It made filmmakers realize that truth, even when ugly, could be thrilling. Film historian Peter Biskind summed it up best when he said, "It's one of the most imitated movies of its era." That imitation isn't just about the look or the sound, it's about the feeling. Goodfellas showed that movies could move fast, hit hard, and still stay deeply human. It captured life at full speed, with all its beauty and decay mixed together. And more than 30 years later, its rhythm, its voice, and its truth still echo through every crime story that dares to tell it like it really is.